What happens when anyone can buy an ICE jacket online and start posing as a federal agent? Julie Johnson just confronted Kristi Noem over a loophole that could let vigilantes terrorize immigrants, and Noem had no real answers.
Questions?
Thank you so much, Mr.
Texas
Chairman.
to Texas.
And thank you, Madam Secretary, for appearing before our committee today. I want to address several issues. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of issues that have been addressed, but I do have some substantial concerns over how ICE agents present themselves to the public. Oftentimes, we've seen many videos out there where they're masked and not properly identified. I have a lot of real personal concern about that. I just put myself in the situation of that woman from Tufts, for example. You're just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 3 masked men, not properly identified, attack you and try to take you away. I find that to be reprehensible and not the values of this country. What steps are you taking to make sure that your ICE agents are not masked and properly identified when they approach someone?
Well, ICE agents always identify themselves to individuals that they're encountering or that they're working with. What I would say, as far as if they are wearing something over their faces, it's oftentimes because that agent has been involved in undercover operations or needs to be able to continue the investigative work that they do on a day-to-day basis.
But don't you think, Madam Secretary, that people have a right to see whoever's trying to apprehend them? I think it's creating this unrealistic vigilante system. And are you aware that your materials, ICE agents, jackets, and the sorts are available on Etsy for $20? Anybody can do that, throw a mask on, and run around and terrorizing people of color without any regard for the law, without any regard, because your agency does not have proper protocols to make sure their agents are clearly identified and marked when they're executing their jobs.
Our agents do identify themselves. They verbally do that, and then also by the clothing that they're wearing. And if they do have something that is covering some of their facial features, it's for their investigative work or their undercover work that they do as a part of their job duties as well. What I would say is that it is important that we follow the procedures and protocols for every encounter that we have, and they have done that in every situation to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I would suggest that your protocols need to be revised, because I don't think it's reasonable for masked men to be apprehending people on the streets. I think that instills a lot of fear. It doesn't instill security in the process. And in states like Texas, that is open carry, when any jackadoo can be walking around with a gun, I think some tragic circumstances are at bay. I'd like to switch gears to due process. I have a lot of concerns about the lack of due process that your agency has been affording people in this country. In Texas, for example, you had rounded up 171 individuals, were preparing to deport them, and it wasn't until the Supreme Court issued an opinion that that was unconstitutional and that their due process rights were being violated did your agency actually stop and adhere to the Supreme Court's opinion. My question to you is, has those efforts ceased in your agency? Are you going to cease trying to deport people without access to due process in the courts of law in compliance with the United States Supreme Court?
Well, Congresswoman, we are following due process and using it as to how Congress has laid out to us in statute, and we are complying with all federal judges' orders as well.
Well, you weren't complying at that time. It took the United States Supreme Court to order you to comply, so you hadn't proactively complied on your own. You were intending to wrongfully deport people without access to a court hearing, without access to the rule of law, and that is why it was necessary for the United States Supreme Court,
due process does not guarantee a hearing,
who issued an opinion ordering you and your agency to comply with the due process rights of the people in this country. That's what makes our country great, is we do have access to due process. And so my comment to you is I'm hoping as you move forward, because initially as you were proceeding through these deportation processes, you were not affording people due process, and the Supreme Court has now ordered you to do so. So I am assuming by your testimony that you do intend to comply with the Supreme Court's order moving forward, and we're not going to have any more instances of wrongful deportation without proper access to due process. Is that correct?
We are following federal judges' orders, and
Good.
we are complying with due process
Well, we look
procedures
forward to
as
that.
they are laid out, as Congress has given us those tools to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I have one other question about FEMA. I'm very concerned about the destruction of FEMA. You know, Texas is a state that has a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, and natural disasters. We rely upon FEMA extensively, and I'm very worried about that. And when you are governor, though, you actually utilized FEMA for your own state. So you did recognize at the time when you were serving as a governor that FEMA played an important role in natural disasters within South Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes, we had 12 FEMA-related disasters during the 6 years I served as governor of the state of South Dakota.
But I just find it, I'm running out of time, but I just find it ironic.
I now recognize Mr. Pfluger, the gentleman from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Congresswoman Julie Johnson isn't pulling punches here, and for good reason. What she's describing is something genuinely alarming, a breakdown in the basic trust between the public and law enforcement. When ICE agents or anyone claiming to be ICE show up masked, without identification, without accountability, that's not safety. That's fear. That's confusion. And in a nation where millions of immigrants, including legal residents and citizens, already live under anxiety, it's a recipe for abuse. Johnson's concern cuts to something much bigger than just protocol. She's exposing how a lack of transparency creates dangerous gray zones where vigilantes and extremists can thrive. She's saying if anyone can buy an ICE jacket online for $20, slap on a mask, and start harassing people of color in the name of immigration enforcement, that's not law and order. That's lawlessness pretending to be order. And it's not hypothetical. We've seen real incidents. Unmarked vehicles, fake agents, men in tactical gear showing up in immigrant neighborhoods. The idea that DHS and Secretary Kristi Noem aren't closing this loophole immediately says a lot about their priorities, because this isn't just about optics, it's about civil rights. When people can't distinguish legitimate federal agents from self-appointed enforcers, you erode faith in institutions and risk chaos in the streets. Then Johnson pivots, brilliantly, to the issue of due process. She reminds Noem that the Supreme Court had to step in to stop her department from deporting people illegally without hearings, without the basic constitutional safeguards our entire justice system rests on. And that's the part that should stop everyone cold. Because we're talking about the federal government, not a rogue militia, ignoring due process until the Supreme Court literally orders them to stop. That's not a policy disagreement. That's a constitutional crisis in plain sight. Johnson's line of questioning is about accountability, about whether Secretary Noem's DHS respects the rule of law or only the laws they agree with. Her point is clear. No administration, no agency, no law and order slogan gives anyone the right to sidestep the Constitution. And she ends on something even more pointed: FEMA. Because while Noem's DHS has been busy politicizing immigration, it's the same department cutting corners on disaster response and stripping away the very programs Americans rely on when hurricanes, floods, and wildfires hit. It's hypocrisy, laid bare. Noem once called FEMA essential as governor, but now, under her leadership, the same agency faces disarray and defunding. What Johnson's really getting at here is a bigger truth. Government power has to serve people, not control them. When we lose sight of that, when law enforcement starts hiding its face, when deportations ignore due process, when disaster relief becomes political, democracy doesn't just weaken, it decays. And that's exactly why these hearings matter. It's not just partisan sparring, it's about whether the people running the country still believe in the principles that hold it together. If you appreciate leaders like Julie Johnson holding this administration accountable, subscribe to The Liberal Lens. We dig deeper than headlines because democracy deserves more than sound bites. And if you want to help us keep producing bold, independent analysis, join us on Patreon. Every voice, every share, every dollar helps amplify the truth.